Love doesn't always announce its ending with a door slammed shut. Sometimes it whispers behind one left barely closed, in a hallway lit only by the glow of an exit sign, at 2:17 in the morning when you're holding an empty water glass and your wedding band catches the light just right. The inn was old, the kind with floorboards that complained underfoot and radiators that ticked through the night like a second heartbeat. I remember the carpet was burgundy, worn thin in the center where decades of guests had walked from their rooms to the stairs. I remember because I stared at it for what felt like hours, though it could only have been seconds. While behind door 214, I heard my husband laugh the way he used to laugh with me. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears, one small truth at a time. 6 weeks earlier, I'd driven to my sister's apartment with champagne and a dress bag heavy enough to make my shoulder ache. Maya had called me crying the night before, the kind of breathless panic that comes when you're 26 and suddenly realize that writing wedding vows means putting your entire heart into words that 300 people will judge. She'd always been the uncertain one, the one who needed her hand held through college applications and job interviews, while I was the capable older sister who knew how to fold fitted sheets and negotiate salary increases. Our mother used to joke that I'd been born pragmatic, while Maya had been born tender. "I don't know what to say," she'd sobbed into the phone. "Everything sounds stupid. Everything sounds fake." "It's not supposed to be a performance," I told her, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder while I folded Michael's shirts, still warm from the dryer. "Just write what you feel." "That's the problem," she'd said. "I feel everything, and nothing sounds right." Michael had looked up from his laptop when I hung up. He had that easy smile that made strangers trust him immediately, the kind of face that belonged in a cologne ad or a law office where people signed important documents. We'd been married 4 years by then, together for 8, and I'd stopped noticing how handsome he was the way you stop noticing a painting you pass every day. "Maya having a meltdown?" he'd asked. "Wedding vows. She's spiraling." He'd closed his laptop with the decisive click of someone about to solve a problem. "I could help her with those. You know I'm good with words." It was true. Michael was the one people called charming, articulate, the guy who'd written the toast at every wedding we'd attended, because he knew how to make people laugh and cry in the same breath. He'd written our vows, actually. I'd been too busy with the venue contracts and seating charts to think about poetry. Mine had been shorter, simpler. I'd said I loved him. I'd meant it. "That would be amazing," I'd said, because what kind of sister would I be to refuse help for Maya? What kind of wife would question her husband's kindness? The first evening he went over to help her, I'd made dinner for one. Chicken breast, steamed broccoli, the kind of meal that tastes like discipline. I'd eaten standing at the counter, scrolling through my phone, telling myself it was nice to have the apartment quiet. He came home around 9:30, smelling like Maya's jasmine candles, talking about how she'd finally found her angle, something about building a home in someone else's heartbeat. "That's beautiful," I'd said. "She's got it in her," he'd said. "She just needed someone to help her see it." I'd kissed him then, I don't know why, maybe to prove something. The second evening, the third, the fourth, they began to blur into a routine. He'd come home later each time, would mention some metaphor they'd workshopped, some line Maya had written that made them both laugh. I wanted to feel proud of him. I wanted to feel generous. Instead, I felt like someone standing outside a window, watching a play I hadn't auditioned for. One night I showed up at Maya's apartment unannounced, carrying Thai food because I'd remembered she loved Pad See Ew. The lock clicked, and when the door opened, I saw them on opposite ends of her couch. Respectable distance, 2 laptops glowing between them like chaperones. But something about the air felt disrupted, like I'd walked in a second too late or a second too early. Michael's collar was unbuttoned 1 button further than when he'd left. Maya's hair was down, which she only did when she was comfortable, really comfortable, in front of someone. "Surprise," I'd said, holding up the takeout bag like a shield. Maya had smiled too brightly. Michael had stood too quickly. We'd eaten together on her apartment floor, and they'd read me some of the vows, and I'd said they were perfect, which they were. Everything was perfect. The jasmine candles burned. The spring rain tapped against the windows. I went home early because I had a morning meeting, and as I drove away, I saw Michael's silhouette in Maya's window, still there, still helping. That's when I started noticing the receipts. They appeared on our kitchen counter like evidence I wasn't supposed to find. Coffee from the shop 2 blocks from Maya's apartment, timestamps at 10:47 p.m. a parking stub from the garage near her building, dated on a Tuesday when he'd told me he had a late dinner with clients. I didn't say anything. I folded them carefully, creased them down the middle, and put them in my purse. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. Maybe I wanted to be wrong. The wedding approached like a tide coming in, inevitable, accelerating. Maya texted me photos of table arrangements. Michael came home later. I started sleeping on my side of the bed in a way that felt territorial, hugging the edge like I was guarding something. When we had sex, which became less frequent, I'd search his face for signs of elsewhere. He kept his eyes closed more than he used to ask. "Are you okay?" He'd asked me once, his hand on my hip in our dark bedroom. "Tired," I had said, which wasn't a lie. The night before the wedding, we all checked into the Riverside Inn, a converted Victorian with 30 rooms and a breakfast porch that overlooked a creek. Maya and her fiancé Josh took the bridal suite on the 3rd floor. My parents took a room on the 2nd. Michael and I were in 207, across from the ice machine, which rattled and hummed every 40 minutes like clockwork. The rehearsal dinner had been champagne and salmon, speeches and laughter. My father had cried during his toast. Michael had made everyone laugh with a story about Maya, at age 7, demanding to marry the mailman. I'd watched them across the room, my sister glowing in her rehearsal dress, my husband animated and generous with his stories, and I'd thought about how love is supposed to look like this. Public, witnessed, safe. After dinner, Josh and his groomsmen had gone to a bar in town. Maya had claimed she was too nervous, needed to rest. Michael had said he was exhausted, wanted an early night. I'd sat in our room watching him brush his teeth with the door open, the way married people do when privacy has become optional. "Big day tomorrow," he'd said, his mouth full of toothpaste. "Yeah." "You should sleep. You look tired." I did look tired. The mirror in the bathroom showed me a woman who'd forgotten to pluck her eyebrows, whose mouth had formed new lines at the corners. When had that happened? He'd fallen asleep quickly, the way guilty people sometimes do, their conscience exhausted from carrying its own weight. I'd lain awake listening to him breathe, to the ice machine across the hall, to the old building settling around us like something trying to get comfortable. At 2:17 a.m., my throat was dry. I'd slipped out of bed in my sleep shirt and bare feet, not bothering with my robe because I was only going to the hallway, just to the ice machine where I could fill my water glass. The hallway was dim, lit by 2 exit signs that cast everything in a greenish glow. The burgundy carpet muffled my footsteps. I was halfway to the ice machine when I heard it. Laughter. Soft. Intimate. The kind that comes from deep in the chest when you're trying to be quiet but can't quite manage it. Door 214 was open just an inch, maybe less. A slice of light fell across the hallway floor. I should have kept walking. I should have filled my water glass and gone back to bed and chosen not to know. But my body had stopped moving. My feet had rooted to that worn carpet. And I stood there, holding an empty glass, while behind that door I heard my husband's voice say something I couldn't quite make out, followed by Maya's whispered response, and then more laughter, and then silence. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people writing together. The charged silence of 2 people who'd just stopped talking because they'd found something better to do with their mouths. The sound that came next wasn't laughter. It was the rustle of fabric, the creak of a mattress, a soft, breathless sound that I recognized because I'd made that sound myself. Though not recently, not in months, not since back when Michael used to look at me the way I'd seen him looking at Maya at dinner, across the candlelight, when he thought no one was watching. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for my fingers to go numb around the water glass. Long enough for the ice machine to cycle on, then off again. Long enough to memorize the pattern of light on the carpet, the exact distance from where I stood to that barely closed door, the number of steps it would take to cross that distance and push it open and make the invisible visible. But I didn't move. I stood in that hallway like someone watching a car accident in slow motion, unable to look away, unable to intervene, just bearing witness to the moment when the world fractures and everything you thought was solid reveals itself to be made of glass. When I finally walked back to room 207, I didn't fill my water glass. I set it on the dresser without a sound. Michael was still asleep, still breathing easy, and I climbed back into bed beside him and stared at the ceiling until the darkness outside began to thin toward dawn. Morning came whether I was ready or not. The wedding was at 3 o'clock. I had 5 hours to decide who I wanted to be. The woman who knew, or the woman who didn't. The woman who protected her sister's wedding day, or the woman who protected herself. The woman who could stand beside Maya at the altar and hold her bouquet and smile for photographs, or the woman who burned it all down before the first dance. Michael stirred beside me, reached across the bed, found my shoulder. "Morning," he mumbled. I didn't answer. He stretched, yawned, kissed the back of my neck in a gesture I'd once found tender and now felt like erasure, like he was trying to cover his tracks with affection. Like if he was sweet enough this morning, I might forget what I'd heard last night. "Sleep okay?" he asked. "Not really." "Wedding jitters, you're not even the bride." I turned to look at him then. His eyes were still half closed, his hair mussed, his face soft with sleep. This was the man I'd married, the man who'd proposed on a beach at sunset because he knew I liked things that felt like movie scenes. The man who'd held my hand through my father's surgery, who knew I liked my coffee with too much cream, who'd built me bookshelves from scratch because I'd mentioned once that I wanted them. This was also the man who'd spent last night in my sister's bed. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked. "Like a rock." Of course he did. The morning unfurled like any wedding day morning. Orchestrated chaos, controlled panic, women in robes running between rooms with makeup bags and champagne bottles. Maya's suite became command central. I braided hair and steamed dresses and pretended I was still the capable older sister who knew how to hold things together. Maya was radiant. That's the word everyone kept using. Radiant. She glowed from somewhere deep inside, the kind of happiness that makes a person look lit from within. When she stepped into her wedding dress, white silk, off the shoulder, a train that pooled on the floor like spilled milk, our mother cried. Her bridesmaids clapped. I zipped up the back with hands that only shook a little. "I'm so nervous," Maya whispered to me, her fingers twisting the engagement ring Josh had given her 15 months ago. "You'll be perfect," I said. The vows came out so good. Michael really helped me find my voice. There it was again, his name in her mouth. I wondered if she'd said his name last night. I wondered what else she'd said. "Yeah," I managed. "He's good with words." "You're so lucky to have him," she said, turning to face me, her eyes wide and earnest, and so much like the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Like, genuinely, he's one of the good ones. I adjusted her veil with mechanical precision. "Yeah, one of the good ones." Downstairs in the inn's library, Michael was getting ready with Josh and the groomsmen. I'd avoided him all morning, claiming maid of honor duties, staying close to Maya like a bodyguard. But weddings require you to be in proximity to everyone, eventually. The photographer wanted family photos before the ceremony. I stood beside Michael for the shots, his hand on the small of my back in the way that looked loving from the outside. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I was wearing navy silk, a dress I'd bought 3 months ago when I still thought this wedding would be a celebration instead of a crime scene. "Thanks," I said. "Everything okay? You seem off." The photographer was arranging my parents, moving Josh's mother closer to the frame. Michael's hand stayed on my back. I could feel the heat of it through the silk, could feel the weight of all his lies pressing down through his palm. "I'm fine," I said. "Just want everything to be perfect for Maya." "It will be," he said. "Her vows are going to make everyone cry." I turned to look at him then, really look at him. He met my eyes with perfect innocence, perfect confidence, and I realized he had no idea I knew. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He thought he could stand here in his gray suit with his hand on my back and smile at a camera, and no one would ever know what he'd done in room 214 while his wife slept 30 feet away. Maybe no one would. Maybe that was the choice I had to make. The ceremony was held in the inn's garden, where lilacs bloomed in careless abundance, and white chairs formed neat rows on the lawn. 300 people settled into their seats while string musicians played something delicate and forgettable. I stood at the altar beside 3 other bridesmaids, holding a bouquet of peonies that were already starting to wilt in the heat. Josh waited at the front, his face open with anticipation. The groomsmen stood across from us. Michael was in the 3rd row, between my aunt and uncle, his hands folded in his lap. He caught my eye once and smiled. I didn't smile back. The music changed. Everyone stood. Maya appeared at the end of the aisle, on our father's arm, and even I had to admit she looked like something out of a dream. She walked slowly, carefully, her eyes locked on Josh like he was the only real thing in the world. When she passed my row, she caught my eye and mouthed, "I love you." I mouthed it back. The officiant began. We sat. Josh and Maya stood before him, holding hands, and I watched from 5 feet away as they promised each other forever, as they built a future out of words in front of witnesses who believed every one. Then came the vows. "I've written something," Maya said, her voice clear despite her nerves, and she pulled a folded piece of paper from inside Josh's jacket pocket where she'd hidden it. She unfolded it carefully, and I recognized Michael's handwriting in the margins, his notes, his edits, his touches all over her promises. She read, "Josh, when I was young, I thought love was supposed to feel like certainty, like stepping onto solid ground after swimming too long in deep water. But what I've learned, what you've taught me, is that love isn't solid ground at all. It's the water itself. It's learning to float together. It's trusting someone else to hold you up when you're tired of swimming. You are the kindest person I know. You make me laugh when I want to cry. You make me brave when I want to hide. And today, in front of everyone we love, I'm promising to float with you. Through every current, through every storm, for as long as we both shall live." People were crying. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The bridesmaids were sniffling. Even Josh looked emotional, his jaw tight with the effort of not breaking down. And all I could think was, those weren't Maya's words. Not all of them. I'd heard Michael use that water metaphor before, in the toast he'd given at his best friend's wedding. The bit about floating together when you're tired of swimming, that was his. That was something he'd once said to me years ago when we were still new and every conversation felt like discovery. He'd given her pieces of us. He'd recycled our intimacy and packaged it up as her own. The ceremony continued. Josh read his vows. They were simpler, more honest. Something about how Maya made him believe in magic again. They exchanged rings. They kissed. Everyone cheered. I held Maya's bouquet and smiled for the cameras and felt my face settle into an expression I'd wear for the next 6 hours, like a mask I couldn't remove. The reception was a blur of small talk and champagne, of dancing I didn't remember agreeing to, of cutting cake and throwing bouquets and speeches that praised love like it was something simple. Michael gave his toast. He was brilliant, as always. He made everyone laugh with stories about Maya's childhood, made them cry with words about how love transforms us, makes us better, makes us whole. I watched him from my seat at the head table and wondered how much of what he said he still believed, or if he'd ever believed it at all. Maybe words were just words to him. Maybe they'd never meant what I thought they meant. Maya and Josh left for their honeymoon suite around midnight. My parents went to bed. The party thinned, then dissolved. By 1:30, the inn was quiet again, except for a few lingering guests in the bar. Michael found me on the breakfast porch, sitting alone with my shoes off, looking at the creek where moonlight made everything silver. "There you are," he said. "I've been looking everywhere. Here I am." He sat down beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. We'd been married 4 years, together for 8. We'd built a whole life, an apartment, a set of friends, a rhythm, a history. We talked about having kids next year, maybe. We'd looked at houses with backyards. "Beautiful wedding," he said. "Yeah." Maya's vows were incredible. I think we really nailed them. Like it was a team effort. Like they'd collaborated on something pure. I turned to look at him then. Really look at him. This man I'd loved. This man I'd trusted. This man who'd stood in my sister's wedding and smiled at me across the aisle like none of it had happened. "Michael," I said, "I heard you last night." The words came out quiet, calm, almost polite. He went very still. "What?" "Last night, around 2:15, I went to get water, door 214. The color drained from his face in a way that would have been satisfying if I'd had any room left for satisfaction. But I was so tired of pretending, so tired of holding this truth inside my chest like a stone I'd swallowed. "It's not," he started. "Don't. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I heard you. I know." The creek kept running. The moon kept shining. The world kept turning despite everything. "It didn't mean anything," he said finally. "She was nervous about the wedding, and we were just..." "Just what?" Just betraying me? Just fucking my little sister the night before she married someone else? He flinched at my language. I never swore. I was the practical one, the level-headed one, the one who didn't make scenes. It was a mistake, he said. One time, one stupid... Was it? The question hung between us. Was it one time, Michael? Or was it every night you went over there to help with the vows? Was it in our bed too? Was it in our car? How long? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Why didn't you say something before the wedding? He asked finally. Why let it happen? I'd been asking myself the same question all day. Why had I zipped up Maya's dress? Why had I held her flowers? Why had I stood at that altar and watched her promise forever to one man while she'd spent the previous night with another? Because she's my sister, I said. Because it was her wedding day. Because I wasn't going to be the person who burned it all down. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? What now? What do you do when the person you trusted most proves they were never worthy of that trust? What do you do when your sister, your baby sister, who you'd protected and guided and loved, looked you in the eye and lied by omission? What do you do when the life you built reveals itself to have been constructed on sand? Now, I said. Now I go home. Alone. You can stay here, or you can go. I don't care. But when I get back to the apartment, I want your things gone. Can we talk about this? No. Please. No, Michael. I stood up. My feet were bare and cold against the porch boards. I was still wearing my navy dress. My hair was falling out of its pins. I probably looked nothing like the composed maid of honor who'd smiled through the ceremony. I loved you, I said. I really did. I thought we were building something real. We were. We are. This doesn't have to. Yes, it does. I walked away from him then, across the porch, through the inn's lobby, up the stairs to room 207. I packed my things in the dark, quietly, while he stayed outside. I didn't take his clothes. I didn't destroy anything. I just folded my dress carefully into my suitcase, put my shoes in their bag, gathered my toiletries from the bathroom. I left my wedding ring on his pillow. By 3 a.m., I was on the road, driving home through darkness that felt appropriate. The highway was empty. The radio played songs I didn't hear. Somewhere behind me, Maya and Josh were sleeping in their honeymoon suite, probably tangled together, probably happy. Somewhere behind me, Michael was realizing I'd actually left. I drove and drove and drove, and when I finally pulled into our apartment complex as the sun was rising, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not happy, not healed, but lighter. Like I'd put down something I'd been carrying too long. Maya called 3 days later, back from her honeymoon. Josh didn't know. She wanted to know if I was okay, said she'd noticed I'd left the reception early. Her voice on the phone sounded bright, unburdened. She had no idea I knew. I'm fine, I told her. Just tired. The wedding was perfect, wasn't it? Everything I dreamed of. Yeah, perfect. Thank you for everything, for being there, for being you. I couldn't have done it without you. You're welcome. There was a pause. In that pause, I could have told her. I could have said, I know what you did. I know what you are. I could have shattered her honeymoon, her marriage, her version of what happened. But I didn't. I love you, Maya said. I love you too, I said. And I meant it, which was the strangest part. I meant it even knowing what I knew, even carrying what I carried. Love doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always arrive with justice attached. Sometimes you love someone despite what they've done. Sometimes you love them from a distance. Sometimes you love them and hate them and forgive them and never speak to them again, all at the same time. Michael moved out that week. He left his key on the counter. He took his books, his clothes, his laptop, that piece of himself he'd always kept separate from me. He sent texts I didn't answer. He called once, twice, 3 times. I blocked his number after the 3rd. My mother asked why we'd separated so suddenly. I told her we wanted different things, which wasn't a lie. I wanted honesty. He wanted permission. Maya started to notice something was wrong when I declined Thanksgiving, when I couldn't make Christmas, when I was suddenly too busy for Sunday dinners. She asked if I was angry with her. I said no, which also wasn't exactly a lie. Anger was too simple a word for what I felt. Anger burns clean. What I felt was more like grief. Heavy, complicated, permanent. She never found out that I knew. Maybe she suspects. Maybe she thinks I left the reception early because I was tired, because I had work the next day, because weddings are exhausting when you're in them. Maybe she tells herself that what happened with Michael was just a moment, an aberration, something that died the minute she said, "I do," to Josh. I hope it was. For her sake, for Josh's sake, I hope it was just one night. One stupid mistake made by two people who were scared and drunk on the intimacy of late nights and shared words and the strange electricity that comes from building something together, even if that something was just a wedding vow. But I'll never know. And maybe that's the real loss, not just the marriage, not just the sister, but the certainty of ever knowing what was real. I moved 6 months later, a smaller apartment across town, closer to work, a place where nothing reminded me of Michael. I boxed up the wedding photos, the gifts we'd received, the coffee maker he'd used every morning. I kept the bookshelves he'd built because they were beautiful and I'd always wanted them. And I didn't see why I should give up beauty just because it came from tainted hands. Maya had a baby last spring, a girl. She sent me a photo of her tiny face, all scrunched up and red. She asked if I wanted to come meet her. I said I would eventually. I haven't yet. Michael got engaged again, I heard. Someone he works with. They're planning a fall wedding. I hope she asks him to help with the vows. I hope he does. I hope he gives her all his best words, all his cleverest metaphors, every beautiful lie he knows how to tell. And I hope she believes him. Because isn't that what love is? Believing someone when they tell you who they are, even when every piece of evidence suggests they might be someone else entirely. Trusting them to hold you up when you're tired of swimming. Choosing to float together through every current, every storm. I don't know anymore. What I know is this. Some nights I still wake up at 2:17 a.m. for no reason, and for a moment I'm back in that hallway with the burgundy carpet, holding an empty water glass, standing outside door 214. I can still hear the whispers. I can still hear the silence that came after. And I'm still standing there, frozen, making the same choice over and over. To know or not to know. To speak or stay silent. To burn it down or let it stand. Most nights now I choose to let it stand. Not because Maya deserves my protection. Not because Michael deserves my silence. But because I deserve to stop carrying their story around like evidence I'll never present to a jury. I see them sometimes in my mind. Maya in her white dress. Josh saying his vows. 300 people bearing witness to promises that may or may not hold. I see Michael in the third row, smiling at me, his hand reaching for mine across the distance. And I see myself standing at the altar in navy silk, holding a bouquet of dying flowers, choosing to say nothing. That was love too, in its way. Painful, complicated, imperfect love. The kind that survives even when it shouldn't. The kind that exists despite betrayal, despite wounds that never quite heal. The kind that lets you walk away with your dignity intact, even if your heart never quite recovers its original shape. Time passes, that's what it does. Days blur into weeks, weeks into seasons. The creek behind the Riverside Inn keeps running. The lilacs bloom every spring. Somewhere, Maya and Josh are building their life, and maybe it's happy, and maybe it's enough. Maybe she never thinks about that night. Maybe she does, and it hurts her the way it hurts me, and we're both just walking around carrying the same secret from different sides. I don't date. People ask why. I tell them I'm focusing on work, on myself, on building the life I want without needing someone else to make it complete. It's partially true. The other part is that trust is a house I used to live in, and someone burned it down, and I'm still standing in the ashes trying to remember what all the rooms looked like. My mother calls every Sunday. She asks about Maya, tries to bridge the distance growing between us. I make excuses. Eventually, she stops asking why we don't see each other anymore. Some silences are louder than words. But here's the thing about pain. It changes shape over time. That knife-sharp shock of discovery dulls into something you can carry. That hallway moment, the whispers, the knowing, becomes just another memory filed away with all the others. It doesn't hurt less exactly. It just hurts differently, like an old injury that aches when it rains. I forgave them, eventually, not because they asked for it. They never knew they needed to. But because forgiveness isn't about them. It's about setting down the weight of what they did and walking away lighter. It's about choosing not to let their mistakes define the rest of my story. I forgave Michael for being weak when I needed him to be strong. I forgave Maya for being young and stupid and selfish in the way that young people sometimes are. I forgave myself for standing in that hallway and choosing silence, for protecting a wedding day instead of protecting myself. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It just means I'm not carrying it anymore. I've set it down by the side of the road and kept walking. Sometimes at weddings now, other people's weddings, friends, colleagues, I watch the vows and wonder how many of those promises will hold. How many couples standing at the altar actually know each other, really know each other, beneath the romance and the hope and the champagne glow of new love. How many of them will discover, years down the line, that the person they married was just a story they told themselves. But then someone says something true, something raw and unpolished and achingly honest, and I remember that love isn't about perfection. It's about seeing someone fully, flaws and failures included, and choosing them anyway. It's about being seen the same way in return. Michael couldn't see me. Maybe he never did. Maybe I was just a role he needed filled. Capable wife, good partner, someone to build shelves for, and Maya was too young to see anyone but herself, too caught up in pre-wedding nerves and the intoxication of attention from someone who made her feel articulate and seen. But I see them both now, clearly, from a distance. And what I see is just human, flawed, selfish, scared humans making choices that hurt other humans because they were too weak or too thoughtless or too desperate not to. I see myself too, standing in that hallway, making the choice that would define everything that came after. And you know what? I'd make the same choice again. Not because it was right, not because it protected Maya or salvaged something worth salvaging, but because in that moment, frozen on that burgundy carpet, I learned something true about myself. I am not the kind of person who burns things down. I am the kind of person who walks away quietly, who absorbs the impact to spare everyone else the explosion. Maybe that's strength. Maybe it's weakness. Maybe it's just who I am, and there's no moral weight to it at all. Last month, Maya sent me a message. Just one line. I miss you. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. I typed responses and deleted them. I miss you too. I miss who we used to be. I miss the version of us that existed before I heard you with my husband. In the end, I just sent back a heart emoji. Small, non-committal, neither yes nor no. She didn't reply. The thing about secrets is they change shape depending on who's carrying them. For Maya, that night might be something she's buried so deep, she's convinced herself it never happened. For Michael, it might be just another regret in a long line of mistakes he's made and forgotten. But for me, it's the moment everything crystallized. The moment I understood that love and betrayal can exist in the same breath. That family can be both your foundation and your wound. That you can do everything right. Be kind, be generous, be understanding, and still end up alone in a hallway at 2:17 a.m., listening to your life unravel behind a barely closed door. People think betrayal is the moment of discovery, the phone screen that lights up with the wrong name, the lipstick on the collar, the lie that finally cracks. But betrayal isn't a moment. It's the weeks and months that came before, every small choice that led to that moment, every time someone chose something easier over something true. And maybe that's what I'm still learning, 3 years later, standing in my small apartment with my beautiful shelves and my single coffee mug and my carefully rebuilt life. That healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new. Someone who knows what love looks like when it's real, and what it looks like when it's just words on a page, polished to perfection by someone who never meant them at all. I don't know if I'll ever talk to Maya again. Not really talk. Not about what matters. And I don't know if I'll ever trust someone enough to call them home again. But I know I'm okay with not knowing. I've made peace with the questions that don't have answers. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about alternative endings. The version where I pushed open that door, the version where I confronted them before the ceremony, the version where I told Maya, told Josh, told everyone, and watched the whole beautiful lie collapse in real time. But those are just stories. The only real ending is this one, me, here, now, learning how to float on my own. Not because someone taught me how. Not because love held me up when I was tired of swimming, but because I figured out that I never needed anyone else to keep me afloat. I was always strong enough to swim, I just didn't know it yet. And maybe that's the gift they gave me in the end. Not the love they promised, not the loyalty I deserved, but the hard, necessary truth that I am whole on my own, that I always was, that some people will help you with your vows and mean every word, and some people will polish promises until they shine like truth. And the difference between the two is the hardest lesson you'll ever learn. I learned it in a hallway at 2:17 a.m., standing on burgundy carpet, holding an empty glass. And every night since, I've been learning to live with what I heard. I never went back to the Riverside Inn, but I heard the lilacs bloom every spring, whether anyone's watching or not.